That one felt better. The last one was a little slow, but positive tracking on the sights. I'm shooting my Walther P99 because every few weeks, every month or so, I try to take something out that I would likely be using. I say likely be using. The chances of me using my carry pistol, which this is my carry pistol, is probably a lot higher than my beautiful MR73. That brings me to a good point, because I wanted to talk about the sexy, useless stuff that guys like to think about. Because the chances are, I mean, as much as that puts the hair on your chest, the chances of me using the 357 revolver in an event is probably much slimmer than my carry pistol. And that brings me to the sexy useless. A lot of times you'll see guys go out there, they'll practice things like Team CQB, they'll talk about DMR shooting, sniper teams preparation, how to run scope carbines, and that stuff is cool. Don't get me wrong, I love that stuff. That's why I have a whole channel dedicated to that stuff. But relative to a carry pistol that you are familiar with and you practice very often with, that is the sexy useless. It looks sexy, but relatively useless for what you would be accomplishing in the civilian world in relative peacetime. Well, then they would tell me that, well, what if the Russians invade? What if the Chinese invade? What if I need these skills when the time is right? But they can't nav, i.e. they can't orienteer themselves onto an objective. They can't conceal themselves. They can't drive tactically. They don't know how to off-road. They don't know how to recover vehicles. They can't work communication devices. They don't know radios. They don't know how to find water. They don't know how to cook. They don't know how to use drones. You are effectively useless in a tactical environment if all you can do is shoot precision rifles very well. Granted, cool skill. I like it, that's why I do it. But that's driving to the point of us being very dishonest with ourselves. Why are we doing this? Is it a hobby or is this an actual skill that we want to foster? Now, obviously in life, there's going to be a lot of sexy and useless things that you pick up. The luxury items, the things that people tell you to treat yourself and therefore spend money on. Now, I don't necessarily think that you shouldn't spend money on these things, but we'll get back to it a little later in the conversation. I do, however, think that a lot of people have a problem identifying things that they need versus things that they want, the sexy useless, or rather the sexy irrelevant things, irrelevant to the essence or the priorities in life. Doing better in training yourself, giving yourself more skills so you can do better in life. If you're an entrepreneur, figuring out how to trim your company a lot better to run more efficiently, burning the midnight oil to better a process, being a better husband, being a better father to your children. A lot of these things are priorities in life. And while, yes, I'd love spending time with my kids, yeah, there are moments that I'm just like, I'd really rather go to the range. Or there are moments that I really don't want to get started on this work project because it's going to take another 12 hours before I can finish it. I'd really like to go to the range instead. This is where discipline comes in. And the answer to all of these things, of course, is discipline. So how do you muster the discipline to do this type of stuff? How do you push yourself to do this stuff? Well, be a fucking man and muster the discipline. There's no ifs, ands, or buts around it. Now, that stuff is priority, right? I talked about how the small things, the petites joies de vivre, if we're talking about this stuff in French, how the sexy, irrelevant things, how can they actually fit in life if our lives are full of priority and we're always busy with dealing with priority, granted, if you have the discipline to do this type of stuff. Now, I do think these small wins, the small things, the hobbies in life are important. It's not important in a sense that that takes over what you have to do as a priority, but more so, those small things are important to keep your sanity in check. Those small things are important because that is, in many ways, the meaning of life. And in the Far East, a lot of times where I grew up, I saw a lot of people working themselves to death. 90-hour weeks, for what at the end of it? They didn't spend any time with their children. They didn't get to spend any time bettering or enjoying life themselves. They got the rank at the company, and that's it. They die single. They die hollow. You don't want that. So the sexy irrelevance is important in life as well, but it's certainly not a priority. Think of Maslow's hierarchy for life, right? You have the essentials for staying alive to begin with. And then you also have the essentials to keeping your family in a good place. And as a man, you of course want to keep them provided and protected. Fine. Check all that type of stuff, and then you look after yourself. Now, sometimes you may say, it's just not a convenient conversation with my wife to talk about. Well, I would then also flip the conversation back and say, be a fucking man and muster some courage to talk to your wife about this type of stuff. This is a relationship that you're in. So understand that while your enjoyment isn't a priority for the family's needs, she would probably want you to be in a good mental state. Everything's a balance, right? So even the sexy irrelevant have their place in life. Maybe that's not the priority in life, but it's still certainly something that you want to think about. Anyways, back to the range where I shoot a few more of these. I'll recap what I'm talking about here. So let's look at the MR73 357 Magnum that I have right here. I love shooting it. Does it mean that I'm going to turn it into my primary carry pistol? I mean, yes, I could, but should I? I'm thinking in terms of sexy relevant things or sexy irrelevant things versus more relevant things that I want to accomplish in life. And a lot of times, if you are interested in shooting guns, that is awesome. There's a reason why my co-host Josh and I still do it all the time. But we also have a channel, and that is relevant to us running the channel. And a part of that is also using that to run a business. So to us, that is a highly relevant thing to have. To us, to review a rifle, it is relevant for us to take a bunch of courses. But maybe that's something you're interested in. There's nothing wrong with that. I would say probably a more economical way or a more sensible way of approaching that is to make a lot of money, let that company run itself, or maybe this is a part of what your company does. Focus on your family, focus on yourself, focus on your life, turn that income and time that you have left over after you take care of all of those things into pursuing a hobby. And a hobby, I would say nowadays, is just as important as a main gig, because that's the type of stuff that keeps you sane. That is a hobby. It's not a primary thing. The hobby is always the sexy irrelevance, because you don't need that hobby to survive. Not yet, at least. The society hasn't fallen apart. So identify those sexy irrelevance and work on things that are more relevant to your life and to your society out there. That is much better than about half an hour and 100 rounds ago when I showed up. Repetition is king. Bonus session. Let's see. One of them was a dud, so I need to find out which one. This one. Let's see if it works. And I missed. Oh,